So this is the material that I use to make my nibs. It's a mixture of sterling silver and palladium. The palladium gives it the hardness and stiffness of 14 karat gold. Years ago, Schaefer made a nib that was sterling and palladium. It was very popular, and then they stopped making it, and a lot of people liked it. And of course, my whole thought was, does the world need another gold or steel or titanium nib? So to be different, I decided to use this material. It's still a precious metal, and it is really beautiful when it's finished. And what I do is I take it and I roll it out on this machine. It starts out a little bit thicker, and then I roll it out. And next I'll show you the process of how I stamp it out. Okay, here at the bench where I stamp out my nibs, there's a few ways that you can do this. Now, this was one of my original blocks that I had made, and it stamps out a size 8 and size 6, but I find that I was wasting a lot of material, so I went to a friend who makes these pancake dies, and he does a really good job. His name is Dar Shelton. And he cuts these out by hand, and it's a great way to make my blanks, because what I can do is I can make the most of my material. It's easy to set these, it's easy to stamp these, and they really work well. Next, I take and I put the material inside the die, and then I put it inside the hydraulic press. Then, using a sacrificial block of aluminum, you can see how it works. There you hear that sound, and you know that it's cut through. We pick up the die, and there is our blank. Once I stamp out the blanks, they all start out as a rough cut blank. And what I do initially is some filing to this till I get it a little bit more symmetrical before I start the bending process. Here's one that I've just finished filing, and it's just about ready to get to the bending process. Using this set of files, which includes different shaped files, triangular, half round, square, round, flat, in all different types of grits, from coarse all the way to very fine, I can now shape the silhouette of the nib to get the proper profile before I start to bend it on the swage blocks. So here's the swage block that I use to form all my nibs to shape. It is a typical jeweler's swage block, and I think this one is made by Durston, so it's a little bit pricey. Using it, I will use each concave from large to small to get to this desired concave diameter that I want. I typically don't use the larger size ones because I kind of like to steer my nib into the shape that I want it, and it seems to work a lot better for me. Here I've switched to a smaller diameter rod, and that's to get even more ability to steer the concave, and the results are obvious. You start to see the nib forming to shape. And what I try not to do is I try not to distort the metal. And because what you could do if you're hitting too hard is you could start thinning out the metal in certain spots. And you do not want that. You want to keep the thickness all the way through. All you want to do is bend the nib. You don't want to thin the nib out. Now what you're looking at is my nib burnishing block and several burnishers. I use these to refine the shape of the nib and to get it to the correct diameter so it can fit perfectly over top the feed. Okay, now you see that it is formed around the feed. Next, we're going to go to filing and get the shape that we want before we're going to add the tipping. Using this half round file, I'm able to get the shape that I want from the shoulder to the tip. It's very important to try to make this more symmetrical. It's unsightly when it's off, and it's a very difficult process to get them to a point where they look symmetrical, and it's tedious going back and forth trying to file this and shape it to the right point to where you could add the tipping. All right, now I'm at the point where I feel that I've got the shape I want and I'm ready to tip. Now, it doesn't mean that I'm not going to have to go back later on and refine some fine tuning and, with the files and stuff, but basically where I have it is I have it at a rough finish shape. So here we are in the state of it's ready to be tipped. I've got it bent. It fits in with the feed in the housing, and it's ready to be tipped. The tipping is material that's made of osmium, ruthenium, and tungsten. It's very hard tipping, and it will be welded on. And I use an interesting process that I developed myself. So at the tip of the nib, you'll see a small red mark. And that's where I'm going to take my rotary tool and add a concave divot. That's where the ball will sit when I tack it on or weld it on. Using this high-speed drill press and a 1mm drill bit, I take and I drill out the tip of this nib so at 1mm, so it will fit over the 1.2mm tipping ball prior to welding. This is the Sunstone opposed head welder. This is the welding head that welds the tipping to the nib initially. And it works by foot pedal. And once I put the nib tipping in this divot right here, I'll place the nib over top of it using that drilled out hole as my guide mark to put it right over top, and I'll have a small crown just sticking out of the top. As you can see, I placed the tipping in that divot in there, and it's not going to move. Next, I'll place the nib, the tip of the nib over top. Okay, back at the jeweler's bench after I tipped it. As you can see, it's a perfectly welded tip, and that small little drill hole did great to center it and get it even in the correct spot. It's probably an unconventional method, but it works. Sometimes it's not always perfect, but most of the times I get it centered and it looks pretty good. Next, I'm going to finish filing and finish the file and the profile and the shoulders of this to get it to the exact shape I want before I slit it. Right, now that we've filed to get the shape that we want and to get the top of the tipping flush, some people like to leave the tipping a little bit proud. I actually like to keep it flush. It's just a look that I like better. And then next, I'm going to take these sanding boards, and you've got 400, 600, and 800, and I'm going to do a little bit of finish work to get it ready to slit. I'm also going to use a piece of sandpaper and a dowel to get into the grooves here that are more hard to get on a flat board. Okay, so before I slit, I'm going to bring it over to my jewel tool, which is right here, and I'm going to give it a quick buff with a 3M finishing pad. Okay, so the slitting is done, and the last process is going to add the breather hole. Well, a lot of people or a lot of companies you see slit once they do the breather hole. So the breather hole is first, then comes the slit. And I think that's a little counterproductive, because if you don't get it right down the middle, you're screwed. So I use an old-fashioned hand-driven jeweler's drill. So using a scribe, I just run it down my slitting, and then I create a little divot there so the drill bit will know exactly where to go when it starts to drill. This is about as low tech as you can get. So I just smoothly drill a small hole. It should go pretty quick. There we go. And as you can see, perfectly centered. Well, over the last 3 days of filming for this content, I've made these 6 nibs. So what you see in the content is just partial videos of making these 6 nibs. Over the last 2 years, I've developed my own process of making nibs, and it works for me. It may not work for you if you decide to get into making nibs, but you know, hopefully something that we've showed you here will, you know, maybe spark some interest. Now, I know I have a lot of different tools, and you know, there's a lot of money invested here. And when I first started out making nibs, there wasn't a lot of help. I think I got help from a few people, most notably Jim Crawford and of course my nib grinder Mark Bacchus. Those were the 2 best helps I had. But to finish off the construction of the nibs, it's time for heat treating. This is my Paragon kiln, and I've loaded up all 6 nibs I've made. They'll stay in here at about 800 degrees for about 30 minutes. Once that's done, they get a cold quench of water, and then they should be hardened enough to use. And that is it.